Hello and welcome. Thank you for participating in Morehead at Home Skywatching. My name is Amy Sale. I'm an educator at Morehead Planetarium and Science Center. We are a unit of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, located on campus. We also work throughout the state through a number of outreach initiatives like our summer camp programs, mobile lab vans, and the annual North Carolina Science Festival. Our mission is to help people better understand science, technology, and health, and we do this through engaging learning opportunities like this live virtual event. We're happy to have you here today for our topic, June Carolina Skies, and Nick will get us started.
Thanks, Amy, and hello, everybody. Welcome to Morehead at Home Skywatching. We're excited you're with us today. My name is Nick Eakes, and I'm an educator at Morehead. And as Amy mentioned, today we're going to be diving into June Carolina skies. So if you've been with us in past sessions, what we're going to do today might look a little bit familiar, but one of the beautiful things about our nighttime sky is that it changes throughout the year. So if you participated in May Carolina skies, the June Carolina skies is going to be a little bit different. So before we begin, I'll tell you a little bit about how this is going to work. We're going to be using a program called Stellarium. It's kind of like a flat screen planetarium to help us simulate or pretend that we're looking at the real night sky. And Stellarium is free. You can get it on your PC. You can find that at stellarium.org. And in a little while, we'll pop that link into the chat so that in the future, maybe you can explore space with this program as well. And I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen so you can see what the Stellarium looks like. I will tell you as we start to discuss this sky, if you have questions, the best way to get in touch with us and have your questions addressed is to use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. So if you have something that you're curious about that we're discussing, or even if it's a little bit tangential, put it in there. And at the end of the session, we should be able to take some time to talk about your questions. But let me describe what you are seeing. So this is our daytime sky here on Tuesday, the 16th of June. I'm pointing this out at the bottom of our screen because this is, where our date and time are going to be located. It's 2020-06, that's June, 16, that's today. And you see we're here just a little after 10 a.m. Now in the real world, we have to wait for every second to go by before we can make it nighttime. But in Stellarium, we can actually just speed things up. But first, before we get to that beautiful nighttime sky, I think we had a question for you, and I might be able to pull it up here. What are you most interested in seeing in tonight's sky? So you should be able to have a few options there, the moon, planets, or stars. And this is just an opinion question, whichever one that you're most interested in seeing tonight.
No right answer, and we probably should acknowledge that for many of us watching, it's cloudy and raining. If you are where we are in central North Carolina, you may not be seeing any of these things in the sky, at least not too soon.
Right. But most of the stuff we're going to be talking about today, even if it's a week from now and you're stargazing, it should look similar at least, but we'll talk about what could maybe be different. But yeah, that's a really good point. It's pretty cloudy here, but virtually you can stargaze with us. So it looks like we have almost everybody's answers. And in a moment, we'll be able to see the results.
Yeah, so see if we can pop up the poll results.
All right. It looks like the overwhelming majority of us want to see planets, and some of us want to see stars. It looks like nobody voted for the moon, but that's okay. We'll show you the moon anyway. Cool. Well, that's a good look at some of the things y'all might be interested in for today. You're in luck if you said stars or the moon, because even here in the daytime, you see that one star, the sun, and our moon are both going to be visible. So we'll hold off, I think, on looking closely at the moon until we get later in the evening. But to start, I don't know about you, Amy, I think I'm ready for it to get dark.
Yeah, let's do some time travel.
Yeah, so I'm going to move time forward, and you're going to notice things appear to start to move in the sky. Now, this is tricky because it looks like the sun is moving around us, but really what's moving is our Earth. So we're actually speeding up the rotation of the Earth. And that makes it look a lot like the sun is moving through the sky. Now, the moon does orbit around the Earth, but the reason you see it moving so quickly is, again, because of the Earth's rotation. So you notice we're a little after 6 p.m. now. You'll start to see that nice change in color as the sun gets close to the horizon where the sky meets the ground. And then we begin to see a nice dark nighttime sky. So I've paused us a little after 9:30 p.m. tonight. So I know that's pretty late, but that's one of the challenges of summertime skies is if you want a nice dark sky, you're going to have to go out past bedtime sometimes.
Well, let's see, what should we do first? I see a couple of bright stars that Stellarium has put labels on, but I'm also noticing, and you all will see it if you look near the top of your screen, you might see 7 stars that you could imagine probably a number of shapes, possibly a Big Dipper.
I accidentally clicked on a satellite there. That tends to happen sometimes. I'm trying to click on one of the stars in the Big Dipper. So as Amy said, 7 bright stars here. But if we were to bring up the constellation lines for the Big Dipper, you notice there's some other stuff here. That's because the Big Dipper is what we call an asterism, or just a familiar grouping of stars. So it itself is not a constellation, but it's part of a larger constellation. So the larger constellation that our Big Dipper is part of is called Ursa Major. And if you were to use your imagination, it's going to be kind of hard to see here since our sky is facing the southward direction. But even though you can't see its head, Ursa Major is supposed to be a big bear. And I know that can be extra confusing because I don't know about y'all. I've never seen a bear with a big long tail like this, but there's some nice mythological explanations for that. So Ursa Major is the big bear and the Big Dipper is part of that.
And we can use the Big Dipper to find all sorts of things in the sky. And if you joined us last month for May Carolina Skies, you're going to notice there's some overlap. The sky does change from month to month, but you do see at least some of the same constellations. So I don't know, Nick, what should we do first? Should we go from the bottom of the bowl maybe to Leo?
Yeah, we're going to hop to a couple different things, but let's find Leo first because I bet on a clear night soon, y'all will be able to do this as well. The best way to do it that I always remember is to imagine that that Big Dipper is filled with water. It is supposed to look like a big soup spoon. So imagine you dip it into a pot of water, and it's a pretty ancient shape in the sky, so it's a little bit leaky. And I always imagine that from the bottom of the Big Dipper, we drip water onto the back of an animal that does not like to get wet, our friend Leo, the lion. So,
you know, you might have one of these cats at home that doesn't like to take a bath. Same thing with Leo.
Yeah, they don't like it. This one's just a little bit bigger. And I know as we look at it here on the screen, you might be wondering, Morehead folks, that looks a lot like a mouse and not a lion. Well, that's one of the things about these constellations is sometimes you have to use your imagination to have the shapes make sense. What I look for when I look at Leo is a backwards question mark. And you see this bright star Regulus here at the bottom. That's the one I clicked on to help expand us out here. That star is fairly bright, and you should be able to see it even in your city sky. It's the bottom of our backwards question mark. And then I look for a small triangle that's supposed to represent the hindquarters of Leo the lion. So if you thought it was a mouse, maybe you thought this was its nose on this side and this was its curly tail, but some folks see that backwards question mark as the mane of the lion.
And you're allowed to imagine whatever you like in the sky. But call it Leo if you want to talk to other people around the world, because astronomers around the world have agreed to call that part of the sky Leo.
Yeah. And that's actually a good point, that part of the sky is Leo. That doesn't necessarily just mean the connect the dot lines or the picture. That means this whole puzzle piece here. So if an astronomer is pointing their telescope towards Leo, they could be pointing down here in the bottom of this section or up here, and that's still considered Leo. So Amy is completely right. You can draw the pictures however you want, but the official thing about it is the name and where it is in the sky.
Okay, so we've used the bottom of the bowl of the Big Dipper in Ursa Major to get to Leo. I bet we can use that handle of the Big Dipper, or if you prefer, the tail of the bear, It looks like it kind of is curving towards a really bright star. So let's see, another word for curve is arc. Let's arc to Arcturus, which is very high in the sky this time of year. It's the brightest star of spring and summer, and it's part of a constellation with a funny name. It's got two O's, Boötes, the herdsman. Looks like he's herding the bear. And I don't know what you all think he looks like. I think he looks kind of like a kite or an ice cream cone. Nick, what do you think it looks like?
I always think it's an ice cream cone. And we see this in the spring and the summer. And at least here in North Carolina, if you have your ice cream cone outside in the spring and the summer, it starts to melt. So I always see this stuff as like the melted ice cream coming
Yeah.
off of Boötes.
Yeah, the dribble coming out the bottom of the waffle cone, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we've arced to Arcturus, we got to keep going. I think we should speed on to Spica. So keep drawing that same general line from that curve from the handle to Arcturus. Keep going, and there is Spica, is the star that Nick highlighted. Very bright star, and it's part of a constellation called Virgo the Maiden. And there they all are in the sky.
So as Amy mentioned, some of this stuff is repetition from when we talked about earlier spring skies, but that's a good lesson on its own. As you move through the year, some of the things that were up late in the evening in the spring, they start to rise earlier in the summertime. So we wanted to point those out because this is that view before 10 p.m. Some of the other things we're going to show you tonight are a little bit later. So it's good to kind of have a refresher on some of these spring skies, and the Big Dipper, as you can see, can help us point and star hop to all of them.
Well, why don't we swing around and take a little bit of a different view, because there's some really interesting stuff that's in the east. It's rising in the east.
Yeah. So you might have noticed, folks, and it's kind of hard to see right here, that we're facing south, and west is on our right and east is on our left. The cool thing about Stellarium is I can just click and drag the sky around. I know that would make us dizzy in real life to drag the sky around like that. But now you see the bottom of our screen has us facing east. And just for perspective, Amy mentioned this earlier, Arcturus is high overhead. This part of the screen that's kind of towards the middle and top here, this is near where the zenith of your sky would be. So this is kind of like looking straight up. And that can be confusing when you're looking at it on a flat screen, but it kind of helps to remember that as we move around to a new direction. But here we are facing east now.
And I also want to mention, just so we don't forget, we have a star chart for you for the June and July skies. And this is very roughly similar to the view that we've chosen for that star chart. And you can get a PDF file of it. If you look in the chat, you will see the URL for where to find the star chart. You can also find it at moreheadplanetarium.org under the Morehead at Home section. All right, so what are we looking at here in the east? I see some, Stellarium marks brighter stars with bigger dots, so I always look for the bigger dots first, because those are going to be the stars that will be easiest to find.
The one that pops out to me is labeled, and I think even if it didn't have a label, it would probably pop out in the nighttime sky, and that is Vega.
Yeah, very bright. And I see two bright stars kind of between Vega and the northeastern and eastern horizon. I wonder if those of you watching can spot it as well. And I don't know, that makes a pretty interesting shape. It kind of looks like a slice of pizza to me. I think I'm hungry.
Yeah, pizza for breakfast kind of sounds good. But I see this as a triangle too. So I know there's probably a lot of ways that we can make triangles in the nighttime sky. You can use your imagination to do it, but this triangle is one that we use to find 3 separate constellations. So we call it the summer triangle, because as you see, it's starting to rise in the evening here in the summertime. So do you want to look at all the pieces of this triangle so folks can see?
I think we should. Yeah.
Let's start with Vega.
The summer triangle is not an official constellation. Those 3 stars that make up the points, they're all parts of different constellations. So it looks like Vega is part of Lyra, the lyre or the harp. And we've got Deneb, which means tail in Arabic. It's a tail of Cygnus. Looks like a kind of bird, a swan.
Yeah, maybe you see the beak here with the long neck, tail, and the wings outstretched. That one I can actually imagine sometimes.
Oh yeah, and if you see that star in the beak, Albireo, that when we can finally do sky watching sessions again, we cannot wait to show you that star through a telescope, because it turns out it's not just one star, it's two different stars and they have different colors. It's a really striking sight. So that's the star Albireo. So if you happen to have a telescope at home, you could try looking. Notice that it's kind of sort of in the middle of the summer triangle. You could try to find Albireo. You'll get a nice little surprise. Okay, well, I see one more star in the summer triangle, Altair, part of Aquila the Eagle.
And that one, I think I have a little bit of a harder time seeing that that's an eagle, but thankfully we have a little bit of imagination help with our picture here. But those three stars together, it's a little more striking in the real sky, I will say, how big of a triangle these three bright stars make. So even though we mentioned that you can make lots of triangles in the sky, I bet this evening or the next evening that it's clear, these three will really pop out to you, that summer triangle. And if you're in a nice, clear, dark place, another neat thing is that the Milky Way appears to travel right through that summer triangle. So you can see the hazy band of our Milky Way here on the Stellarium screen. But if you get to a really dark place, away from city lights, away from light pollution, things like that, you might even be able to get a glimpse of the Milky Way. We see it out at Little River Regional Park when we do our sky watching sessions. So there are places close to the triangle in North Carolina that you can see it. You just have to have a nice clear night.
Okay, and I'm remembering, Nick, that poll question that we ran at the very beginning, asking people what they are most interested in seeing. And we had a lot of fans of planets.
We sure did. So you're in luck if you wanted to see a planet. You just have to be a little bit more of a night owl. So you might have noticed as we were moving time forward that things appeared to rise in the east and set in the west. Even though we've moved our viewpoint, that's going to keep happening. So let's stay up a little bit later and see if we can start to see things rising here in the east and see if we can catch a couple planets. So I'm moving us forward.
And remember, I want to remind you all, while Nick is moving us forward in time, you're seeing new things popping up in the east. If you have any questions about what we're talking about or things that you're noticing in the sky that you're wondering about, feel free to type a question into the Q&A. And we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. Okay, so Nick, what time is it now? How insanely late have you kept us up?
It's pretty late. It's past my bedtime. Here, it tells us we're a little bit after midnight. So this is interesting for those of you who have been trying to follow along the clock. You see it says 00:12:46. That's because Stellarium and most astronomers run on a 24-hour clock. Or they usually reference a 24-hour clock. So 00, that tells us it's midnight. It's a little bit after midnight. So it is pretty late, but you notice here in the east-southeast, you found two planets.
So I think we have a poll question about one of those planets. We're curious, have you ever seen Jupiter in the sky? Let us know the answer. Yes, you have seen Jupiter in the sky. No, you haven't, or maybe you're not sure. So go ahead and take a couple seconds to think that over. Have you ever seen Jupiter in the sky? Not, we don't mean like right here on the screen or inside Morehead Planetarium, but in the real sky, either just with your own unaided eye or through a telescope, doesn't matter. Just have you seen it? It is visible just to the unaided eye. You don't need a telescope to see it. Let us know the answer to that. And then
be honest, because a lot of times planets can look a lot like stars. So if you're not sure, you can say not sure.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And it looks like actually half of the respondents said not sure. And then the other half are evenly split between yes and no. Okay, well, we better talk about how to find Jupiter in the sky.
Yeah, so it's really easy in Stellarium because their planets are labeled, but in the real sky, you're not going to see these labels.
Yeah, Nick, I was out late one night in the past few days when it was clear, and I saw Jupiter. It had no label.
That would be really useful, but there is a good kind of rule of thumb and a trick that you can use to tell the difference between planets and stars. And it generally works, even though it's not the most strict rule. And it has to do with how planets appear to us and how the light from planets reaches us. Because stars, like you see scattered throughout the sky here, they create their own light. They're fusing elements at their core, releasing immense amounts of energy, and that light, even though it takes time to travel, is traveling to us all throughout space from these objects.
But they're really just pinpoints of
Yeah,
light.
they look so
So,
small.
so that light gets disturbed when it goes through our atmosphere. And so, Nick, what do you see when you look at stars? It doesn't look real steady usually, right?
Yeah, sometimes it looks like they're flickering or twinkling, and it reminds me of the song "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." Stars often appear to flicker or twinkle in the sky because their light is coming from so far away. So the other side of the coin is that planets do not create their own light. They're not fusing elements in their core and releasing energy, but we can still see them in an interesting way. We can see them because light from our star, the sun, is bouncing off of them, reflecting off of them, and still traveling through space to us. The big difference is that reflected light from the planets in our solar system is coming from much closer than distant starlight. So it turns out that the song does not go "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Planet" for a reason. Because as you look up at planets, most of the time they're going to shine steadily.
So,
And it can kind of get tricky if you're near the horizon. But I think a good rule of thumb to use is that stars flicker or twinkle, and planets generally do not.
yeah, because when you look at a planet, you're really looking at a disk of light because they're actually close enough to us that even though they're much smaller than stars, if you were to look with binoculars or a telescope, you would see they're actually disks of light. And that disk of light, it doesn't get disturbed quite so much as it passes through our atmosphere generally. Although when you look near the horizon, all bets are off because you're looking through a lot of air when you look at something near the horizon.
Yeah,
Can
I
we
will.
zoom in?
Yeah, let's we were talking about zooming in on disks of light in Stellarium. We can actually do that. So you notice one thing I'll just tell y'all is that when I click on Jupiter, another constellation came out, the constellation Sagittarius. That's because technically, if we look at those borders, Jupiter is within Sagittarius, just like Saturn is within Capricornus. So that's why the constellation kind of popped up for us there. If you want to find Sagittarius, you can find a teapot in the sky, but we're going to be discussing Sagittarius and some of its neighbors in later sessions. For now, let's zoom in on Jupiter. Okay, I think this is a pretty good view. We can get even closer, but I wanted to stop here because you probably notice there are some other labeled points of light. What are those, Amy?
Those look like Jupiter's moons. It's interesting when you look at them through a telescope, and you look at Jupiter through a telescope, you'll see these up to these 4 points of light, and they almost look like they could be stars, but they're actually Jupiter's moons. And this is a really interesting sight. So tonight, 4 of the moons, and Jupiter has many, many moons. This is just 4 of them that you would see in an amateur telescope. They're all lined up on one side because they are orbiting Jupiter. So if you looked the next night, you would see them in a different configuration. Looked again the next night, they would be in a still different configuration.
And it's a really great thing to track. And you wouldn't be the first person to do it if you tried to track where these moons were from night to night. Galileo used his telescope to track the motions of Jupiter's moons, and it was one of the first pieces of evidence that objects orbited something other than the sun, because he noticed a pattern in how the moons were transitioning around Jupiter and kind of figured out that it was Jupiter itself that was pulling these things into orbit. It was a world-changing view. So you can maybe channel Galileo a little bit if you ever get a chance to see these moons. But we can get even closer. Notice some detail of the planet itself. It is very different than our Earth. It's a gas giant. You could fit 1,000 Earths inside of Jupiter, but you still have nowhere to stand because it's covered in almost completely gases and liquids. Somewhere deep down in there, there's a solid core, but I don't think we'd want to test it out and get down to that core because the pressure would be so intense that deep down inside the planet.
Yeah, we don't recommend taking a vacation at Jupiter. Nick, I noticed we're starting to run low on time, and we've got a question about the constellation that Saturn is in right now. And so I wonder if we could zoom in on Saturn and notice that it looks like it's in the borders of a constellation called Capricornus. And there's a question about what is Capricornus? It's supposed to be a sea goat.
Yeah, the sea goat. That's kind of a weird thing to us here in I guess the modern world, but there are lots of stories associated with why Capricornus is a sea goat. But maybe you can do a little bit of your own research into that. I think it is a really funny looking constellation at the very least. So we've zoomed in on Saturn, and you notice it has some similarities to Jupiter. We see bright moons. Saturn has over 70 moons, but you can only see a handful in this particular view. But just like Jupiter, they're orbiting around the planet all the time. But there's a big difference in how I see Saturn and how I see Jupiter. What jumps out to you, Amy?
Oh, it's got to be those rings. Saturn has the most impressive ring system in our solar system. Jupiter, the outer planets actually have rings, but none of them as impressive as Saturn's rings. So beautiful sight.
Okay, we have one more thing we want to show you before our time is all up, because we do want to be able to take your questions. But keep an eye out for Jupiter and Saturn this evening. If you're a really dedicated night owl, sorry, I'm going to swing us back around here to the east, you could stay up even later and catch a couple more interesting objects. So in the interest of being able to see these things a little bit better, I'm going to clear off some of our pictures because I trust that you stargazers can find some of these things on your own. But keep your eyes on Jupiter and Saturn and the eastern horizon for some other things rising.
Oh, I see our red planet just popped up, Mars. And Mars is rising pretty late, roughly 1:30 in the morning. So you got to be committed to go see Mars. Either stay up really late or get up really early while it's still dark out. And then we might get one more planet. Oh, look at that. We got the moon. So the moon is waning crescent. Oh, there we go. We got Venus. So that's a striking sight. Venus is a very bright planet. It's been in the evening sky for a while, and then it vanished from view while it was passing in front of the sun and has popped up again in the early morning sky. So if you're committed to getting up very early, sunrise right now is, at least for central North Carolina, is roughly 6 a.m. So if you want to see Venus, you're going to have to go out before then, because once the sun is up, it's going to be very difficult to find Venus.
Yeah, and you can even see in the Stellarium view that we're starting to get a glow from the sun over here in the east northeast. But again, if you're out there about an hour before the sunrise, look at all the beautiful things you can see. Jupiter and Saturn will be high overhead. Mars will appear red in your sky, and you'll have the moon and Venus as well. So those of you that wanted to see planets, you're in luck. Other than the weather we're having outside right now, you're in luck because there's a really neat grouping of planets in the moon in the early morning sky.
And you might wonder, do they change position from day to day? And yes, a little bit, but the thing that mostly appears to move from day to day is going to be the moon. I wonder, Nick, would it be possible to go forward a couple of days?
Sure. So I'm going to move forward. Everything, our view is going to stay the same. The time is going to stay the same. The only thing that's going to change is the date. So let's move 1 day forward, 2 days forward.
Oh, look at that.
Check this
Practically
out.
on top of each other.
A tiny bit later so that we can see it. Of course, in real life, they're not on top of each other. They're just in the same direction from our point of view, but that's still a really neat thing to see.
Although, if you happen to be tuned in from the Northeast United States or the right part of Canada, in fact, the moon will appear to pass in front of Venus that morning that we're showing right now. But for those of us in North Carolina, and I know there's some people more towards the western part of the United States who are watching right now, they will look very close but not be on top of each other.
Okay, so we could talk and ramble about this sky forever, but let's take a minute before we have to close out to answer any questions.
Yeah, do we need to pop up our final poll question? Yes, okay. How many people are watching this program on your screen? It would help us out if you answered this question so we can keep track of our numbers. And then I see a question from Glenn's account. Is the sun a star? Yes. So the sun is a star, and it just looks so much different from the stars you see at night because it's so much closer to us. So it appears very, very, very bright in our sky. In fact, when the sun is up, you don't usually see much else in the sky because the sun is so bright.
Yeah, I think of it, it's our star. That's where the name solar system comes from. Another name for the sun is Sol. So it's kind of like the boss of our solar system, but it is still a star. It's my favorite star.
Okay. Got a question about how can planets make light that we can see on Earth? So the planets are reflecting light from the sun, and if those planets are have a very highly reflective like cloud cover like Venus, and they're relatively close to us, then they're going to appear quite bright in our sky. So yeah, planets are relatively close to us, so they can appear very bright. And then Nick, it looks like we got maybe one or two others. You want to tackle one of
Yeah,
them?
I see Emily says, do constellations look the same from the space station? And that's a really great question. It turns out, yes, they do look the same from the space station because the International Space Station, all things considered, is not that far away from Earth, just on the order of a couple hundred miles above Earth's surface. So even though that's kind of a long distance, the distance to all of the stars and the constellations hasn't changed by very much. So the patterns in the sky are going to look the same. Now, if you were on a space station way far out around orbiting around a distant star, then you might be in territory where the constellations start to look different. But we don't have any space stations that far out quite yet.
Okay, looks like we are out of time. We hope you will join us for Thursday when we are going to consider the question, where's Orion? You'll notice we didn't point out that constellation in our June skies. We will answer the question of where's Orion on Thursday.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this program and want to see more of what Morehead Planetarium and Science Center is doing, please visit our website, www.moreheadplanetarium.org, and you can look for Morehead at Home and find all sorts of fun resources there. Also, if you want to keep up with what we're doing day to day, please check out our social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Look into some of the posts that we're making about our Hidden No More stories. It's a really important set of stories that need to be told, and I think it's a really fun connection to the science that we are talking about here today. So thank you so much for joining us. If you have any suggestions for future sessions, the stuff you'd really like to talk about, please put it in the chat for us. We'll consider that as we're planning what's coming up next. But otherwise, we'll see you on Thursday.
Bye, everybody.